In a packed courtroom, all eyes were on Jasmine Crockett, a young, underestimated attorney taking on the case everyone thought was already lost. Accused of disrespect by a stern judge, Jasmine faced not only a hefty fine but also public humiliation. Yet, what no one saw coming was that behind her calm demeanor lay the mind of a legal genius. Prepare yourself for a courtroom showdown unlike any other, where truth emerges from shadows and justice finds its voice in the most unexpected way. Subscribe and post in the comments, where are you watching from? In the heart of one of America's largest metropolises, the grand courtroom buzzed with anticipation. The case of Thomas Harris, a young man accused of a high-profile bank robbery, had captured the nation's attention. Every seat was filled. Members of the public, media personnel, and legal professionals, all eager to witness the unfolding drama. On the defendant's table, Thomas Harris sat with downcast eyes and trembling hands, his demeanor a blend of fear and resignation. The overwhelming evidence, crisp surveillance footage, damning eyewitness testimonies, and meticulously gathered fingerprint records, had persuaded nearly everyone present of his guilt. At the center of this legal maelstrom stood Judge Michael Jenkins, a young yet formidable figure renowned for his unwavering strictness and unwavering commitment to upholding the law. His reputation for precision and an ironclad sense of justice had left little room for doubt among the onlookers. His stern gaze and measured tone echoed throughout the cavernous chamber, emphasizing that any deviation from the facts would not be tolerated. Yet, as the proceedings began, it was clear that beneath the formidable exterior of the court lay an undercurrent of skepticism that was about to challenge conventional wisdom. Into this charged atmosphere stepped Jasmine Crockett, the newly assigned defense attorney for Thomas Harris. Despite her youth and the initial doubts raised by some regarding her relative inexperience, Jasmine carried an almost enigmatic composure. Her presence exuded a quiet confidence that belied her tender years in the legal field. Draped in a sharply tailored suit and armed with an incisive intellect, she projected an image of both determination and mystery. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom as the experienced members of the press and legal community exchanged knowing glances. This was not the typical face of a defense lawyer in a case as explosive as this one. As the prosecution laid out its case with meticulous detail, presenting video clips that captured the bank's tumultuous moments and recounting testimonies that painted a damning picture of Thomas Harris, Jasmine listened intently, her eyes tracking every nuance. While every piece of evidence seemed to confirm the narrative of guilt, there was something in her thoughtful gaze that suggested she saw beyond the obvious. The tension in the room was palpable as Judge Jenkins presided over the session with his signature severity, his face a mask of stern expectation. The air was thick with anticipation and silent speculation. Could Jasmine Crockett, with her unyielding pursuit of truth and a mind honed by unexpected brilliance, uncover a hidden piece of evidence that would challenge the seemingly airtight case against Thomas? The stage was set for a confrontation of legal wit and moral fortitude, a battle that would not only decide the fate of a young man shrouded in darkness, but also test the very limits of the justice system. As the gavel echoed through the hall and the court reconvened for the next phase, every eye was fixed on Jasmine. The courtroom held its collective breath, waiting for that pivotal moment when her concealed acumen and legal intuition would surface. In that charged silence, the promise of a twist, a challenge to the overwhelming evidence, and perhaps the dawn of innocence was almost tangible. The resonant case was far from over, and the first seeds of doubt had just begun to take root. The prosecuting attorney rose to his feet with an air of unassailable authority. With every confident stride, he advanced his case against Thomas Harris, reading from his meticulously prepared notes. The room fell into a heavy silence as he introduced the overwhelming evidence. Grainy surveillance footage from the bank, clear images capturing a masked figure in the act, and a series of eyewitness testimonies that painted a damning portrait of the accused. He presented detailed exhibits, prints of fingerprints that supposedly linked Thomas to the crime scene, with each piece of physical evidence matched against forensic reports. His voice boomed through the courtroom, leaving little room for doubt. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he declared, "the evidence speaks for itself. The video is conclusive. The fingerprints are undeniable. and all witnesses have testified to seeing the perpetrator's likeness clearly. There can be no other explanation but that Thomas Harris is guilty of the armed bank robbery. His tone brooked no argument, and the measured nods of his colleagues only reinforced the impression of an airtight case. Yet, as the prosecuting attorney concluded his presentation, all eyes shifted to the defense table where Jasmin Crockett sat poised. Though her youthful appearance had caused some initial skepticism among the seasoned observers, her calm demeanor betrayed a mind alive with incisive thought. Slowly rising, she met the prosecutorial gaze with a measured steadiness that hinted at a deeper strategy at work. "Your Honor," Jasmin began, her voice clear and controlled, "while the evidence presented appears compelling at a glance, I submit that it warrants further scrutiny." There was a quiet intensity in her tone, a subtle challenge that sent a ripple of murmurs across the room. Her eyes scanned the courtroom, focused yet empathetic toward Thomas Harris, whose anxious hands betrayed his inner turmoil. Jasmin proceeded to dissect the so-called indisputable evidence. "Regarding the surveillance footage," she explained, "I have reviewed the video in its entirety, and there are inconsistencies that have been overlooked. The lighting is poor, and the figure's features remain indistinct. How can we be certain that the individual captured on camera is indeed my client?" Her rhetorical question hung in the air like a provocation aimed at unraveling the prosecution's certainty. She then pointed to the fingerprint exhibit. "As for the fingerprints, I have reason to believe that the chain of custody was not as rigorously maintained as it should have been. Contamination, or even intentional tampering, cannot be ruled out under these circumstances." Her words were delivered with a confidence that belied her age, prompting a ripple of disquiet among some members of the jury. Judge Michael Jenkins, whose reputation for strict adherence to courtroom decorum was well known, furrowed his brow at her audacity. The judge's eyes flicked toward Jasmin in a silent admonition, his patience clearly wearing thin as her persistent questioning seemed to chip away at the prosecution's narrative. Yet she pressed on, unfazed by his stern gaze. "Furthermore," Jasmin continued, her voice rising slightly as she laid out her argument, "the eyewitness testimonies, while forceful, are marred by discrepancies. Several accounts differ regarding the description of the perpetrator's build and mannerisms. Should we trust these recollections when conditions were so chaotic?" A tangible tension filled the court, the charged atmosphere reflecting the clash between established authority and emerging new insight. The prosecuting attorney, visibly irked, began objecting sharply, but the judge quickly silenced the outburst with a sharp command. The courtroom was now a stage for an intense intellectual duel. One side firmly anchored in conventional evidence, the other daring to question the very foundations of its infallibility. The air was thick with anticipation. Every person present sensed that Jasmin's pointed challenges were the precursors to a deeper revelation, one that might upend the seemingly clear narrative of Thomas Harris's guilt. As murmurs of disagreement and cautious optimism mingled among the spectators, the stage was set for an epic contest of legal wits that would determine not just the fate of a young man, but potentially the credibility of the entire case itself. As the courtroom simmered with the intensity of Jasmin Crockett's relentless interrogation of the prosecution's evidence, the atmosphere shifted noticeably. What began as a spirited challenge to the seemingly irrefutable case against Thomas Harris soon escalated into a scene charged with tension. Judge Michael Jenkins, who had held court with firm authority and measured patience until now, found himself increasingly perturbed by Jasmin's persistent skepticism. His eyes, usually calm and steely, now hinted at a growing impatience as she continued to question details that, to him, were beyond reproach. "Counselor Crockett," Judge Jenkins interjected sharply, his voice cutting through the murmur of the assembled crowd, "I must remind you that the court is not a forum for personal theatrics or baseless conjecture." His tone carried a steely finality as he pounded his gavel lightly. "Your repeated challenges to the evidence, which the prosecution has presented clearly and conclusively, have now crossed the line of decorum expected in this courtroom." A hush fell over the room. The judge's words hung in the air as the gravity of his rebuke settled among the onlookers. Despite the unwavering resolve in her eyes, Jasmin's expression remained composed, though a flicker of surprise briefly betrayed her. Without missing a beat, Judge Jenkins continued, "For your continued disruption, and for what I deem as disrespect toward the authority and integrity of this court, I hereby find you in contempt and impose a fine." He paused, allowing the declaration to echo through the silent chamber before delivering the final blow. "Counselor Crockett, you are fined for your actions." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom as the weight of the judge's decision took hold. The prosecution exchanged a brief, triumphant glance, convinced that the measure would silence the lone voice of dissent. But even as murmurs of disbelief swept the room, Jasmine held her head high. Rather than retreating into anger or indignation, she met the judge's stern gaze with measured resolve. "Your Honor," she began, her voice steady and unwavering, "I respectfully submit that my actions are not born of defiance for defiance's sake, but from a fervent duty to reveal the truth. The evidence, as presented, leaves gaps that must be addressed for justice to truly prevail. If by challenging the assumptions laid out before us, I disrupt the proceedings, then so be it. I stand by my actions and the pursuit of an honest resolution for my client." Her words, delivered with the calm authority of someone who had long mastered adversity, resonated deeply with many in the courtroom. The fine, intended by the judge to be a deterrent against further disruption, instead amplified the underlying tension between strict adherence to procedure and the courageous pursuit of justice. Whispers filled the room as the press shifted their focus, aware that this dramatic turn was about to reshape the contours of the case. In that charged moment, as the judge's gavel signified the imposition of the fine, the fate of Thomas Harris, and the integrity of the very legal process, hung in the balance. The fine was not merely a punitive measure. It was an emblem of the clash between old paradigms and new approaches, between blind acceptance of apparent evidence and the rigorous quest for absolute truth. As the courtroom settled into a heavy, expectant silence, it became clear that Jasmin Crockett's battle was far from over. Her next move would not only be a test of her legal acumen but a defining moment that would challenge the assumptions of the entire criminal justice system. Undeterred by the judge's fine, Jasmin Crockett refocused the courtroom's attention on the evidence with a renewed determination. Taking a measured breath, she began her next move, a precise, multifaceted dissection of the prosecution's seemingly damning footage and forensic exhibits. Rising once more, she addressed the assembly, her voice both clear and resolute. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen, while the video provided by the prosecution appears straightforward, a closer, more critical examination reveals details that contradict the narrative being presented." Jasmine directed everyone's attention to the large screen where the surveillance footage was replayed. With a practice pointer in hand, she noted subtle irregularities. The figure captured in the recording exhibited movements and body language that did not align with that of Thomas Harris. "Observe the subject's stature and gait," she explained. "There are distinct differences that suggest the individual in this footage possesses a different height and build from my client. The distortion caused by low lighting and the camera's angle only leaves room for ambiguity when one fails to analyze the minutiae." Her analysis was meticulous, and as she highlighted specific frames, murmurs began to ripple through the courtroom. Even skeptical jurors could not help but pay closer attention. Not yet finished, Jasmine shifted her focus to the fingerprint evidence that had been touted as incontrovertible proof of guilt. "The chain of custody process is critical in forensic science," she stated, her tone imbued with authority. "I will now call an expert witness who can speak to the reliability of these fingerprints." Moments later, a distinguished gentleman in a crisp suit and glasses was ushered in. He introduced himself as Dr. Marcus Hill, a forensic analyst renowned for his expertise in fingerprint examination. Dr. Hill took the stand with a measured demeanor and began to explain the intricate process of evidence handling. In this case, the fingerprint evidence was collected under conditions that raise serious questions about its reliability, he asserted. There are several points in the chain of custody where contamination or even intentional misplacement of prints could have occurred. In some cases, prints that match a suspect can emerge from secondary transfer or may even be deliberately planted. As he spoke, Dr. Hill presented detailed charts and images comparing fingerprint smudges and patterns. He contrasted what would be expected from a direct imprint left during a robbery with the characteristics observed in the evidence provided against Thomas Harris. Dr. Hill's testimony was technical yet persuasive. The minutiae observed in these prints, along with discrepancies in their deposition and recovery, indicate that caution is warranted when drawing conclusions from them. It is entirely possible, based on the current evidence, that the prints may not have originated from the accused at all. His clear explanation, backed by visual aids, left little room for doubt. The prosecution's once formidable fingerprint evidence now looked increasingly vulnerable under the scrutiny of objective scientific analysis. As Dr. Hill concluded his testimony, the atmosphere in the courtroom began to shift perceptibly. Jurors exchanged thoughtful glances, and even a few media cameras captured the subtle turning of heads. Jasmine's confident presentation had not only undermined the prosecution's earlier assertions, but had also ignited a spark of doubt regarding the entirety of the case against Thomas Harris. Judge Michael Jenkins, who had earlier displayed a rigid adherence to protocol, now leaned forward with renewed interest as he surveyed the new evidence. His expression, while still guarded, hinted that the case was far from as ironclad as it had initially appeared. Jasmine, sensing the tide beginning to turn, allowed herself a brief, professional smile. Each word, each detail she had meticulously laid out, had chipped away at the overwhelming presumption of guilt. The facts must speak for themselves, Jasmine concluded, her voice resonating with both empathy for her client and a steadfast commitment to justice. If we are to serve the cause of truth, we must be willing to question evidence that has been accepted without sufficient scrutiny. The integrity of this court and the life of Thomas Harris depends on our dedication to such inquiry. In that moment, the courtroom was charged with anticipation. The brilliance of Jasmine's legal acumen had not only exposed significant flaws in the prosecution's evidence, but had also set the stage for the revelations that were yet to come. With the expert testimony of Dr. Hill as a cornerstone of her case, Jasmine had successfully begun to transform a narrative of assumed guilt into one that demanded genuine, forensic investigation. The proceedings were poised on a knife's edge, and every person present could sense that the pursuit of truth was about to take a dramatic new turn. As the courtroom simmered with uncertainty over the reliability of the existing evidence, Jasmin Crockett knew it was time to introduce a decisive element to her defense. With a measured pause, she addressed Judge Jenkins. "Your Honor, may I call Ms. Elizabeth Turner to the stand?" A murmur rippled through the gallery as an unassuming woman in her mid-30s, wearing simple, practical clothing, made her way to the witness box. Ms. Turner was a local store clerk who happened to be present near the bank on the day of the robbery. Though untrained in legal matters, her clear eyes and steady demeanor soon spoke volumes about her determination to set the record straight. Taking a deep breath, Ms. Turner began her testimony. "I was working at the small cafe across the street when I noticed a commotion outside the bank," she recalled, her voice soft yet resolute. "I distinctly remember seeing a man unlike anyone I've seen before, a man who did not look like Thomas Harris. He was taller, had a different gait, and wore a red cap that contrasted sharply with the muted clothing of those around him. Her description was precise, detailed, and, crucially, did not match the features attributed to Thomas by the initial evidence." Jasmine leaned forward, gently asking, "Ms. Turner, can you describe any distinctive features or actions that might help identify this other individual?" Ms. Turner's eyes brightened with the recollection. "Yes, I recall that this man had a tattoo on his left forearm, a pattern of swirling lines and a small emblem that I hadn't seen on the defendant's profile. I also remember he was seen moving quickly away from the bank shortly after the incident. I mentioned this to a police officer at the time, but for some reason, my statement was never followed up on." A hush descended as her words sank in. The courtroom buzzed with a mix of disbelief and renewed hope. Jasmine interjected, "Would you agree that your observation of a different figure near the crime scene challenges the assumption that the evidence solely incriminates my client?" Ms. Turner nodded emphatically. "Absolutely. The man I saw does not match the description of Thomas Harris. I remember clearly that he had a different build and was acting very suspiciously. I believe this is a critical piece of evidence that has been overlooked. The impact of Ms. Turner's testimony was immediate. Jurors whispered among themselves, and even some members of the press captured every nuance on camera. Her account not only introduced a plausible alternative suspect but also cast a glaring light on procedural oversights that had left out key testimonies. The prosecution, once so confident in their arsenal of evidence, now found themselves confronted with a glaring inconsistency. If another man was indeed present at the scene, how could the case against Thomas Harris be as conclusive as it was presented? As the deafening silence in the courtroom gave way to a ripple of renewed scrutiny, Judge Jenkins appeared to take a moment to absorb the implications of this fresh testimony. The energy in the room shifted palpably. Where once certainty reigned, doubt now began to flourish, and the balance of opinion risked tipping in favor of defense. Jasmine's eyes met those of the jurors as she summarized, "Ms. Turner's testimony, combined with the previous evidence I have presented, strongly suggests that an alternative narrative exists, one that warrants thorough re-examination before we can claim that justice is being served." In that charged atmosphere of emerging questions and a shifting perspective among the onlookers, the courtroom had transformed into a crucible of conflicting truths. Every person present sensed that this testimony was not just a minor detail, but rather a critical turning point in a case that had gripped the entire city. With the courtroom still abuzz from Ms. Turner's revelatory testimony, Jasmin Crockett took a moment to gather her composure before unveiling the final piece of evidence, one that would decisively tip the scales of justice. "Your Honor," she said, her voice both calm and resolute, "I now present indisputable evidence that corroborates Mr. Harris's alibi beyond any doubt." With a measured nod, she signaled to a court officer to cue the audio recording. As the speakers at the front of the courtroom crackled to life, a clear, recorded telephone conversation filled the room. In the recording, the unmistakable voice of Thomas Harris could be heard speaking with a close friend. His tone was relaxed and confident as he recounted his whereabouts during the time in question. "I'm here at home with Daniel," Thomas said, his voice steady. "We've been watching the game, and I haven't left the house since 7 o'clock. The details were specific, the background noises, the subtle interjections from his friend, and even the ambient sounds all confirmed that he had been at a different location, far removed from the bank at the time of the robbery. A palpable hush fell over the courtroom as every listener absorbed the weight of the recording. The previously asserted evidence now began to crumble under the undeniable force of Jasmine's discovery. With the audio in hand, Jasmine then rose once more and submitted a formal motion requesting the cancellation of the contempt of court fine that had been imposed upon her earlier. "Your Honor," she declared, "in light of this new evidence, which irrefutably confirms Mr. Harris's alibi, I move to have the fine for contempt rescinded. My persistent inquiry, far from being disruptive, was a necessary pursuit of the truth. It has now been vindicated by facts." Her words were deliberate, each syllable reinforcing her authority and the righteousness of her actions. Judge Michael Jenkins, whose stern facade had recently trembled under the pressure of accumulated evidence and public sentiment, now found himself facing a moment of reckoning. After a long pause, a silence heavy with the realization that justice demanded a reevaluation, he adjusted his glasses and spoke with a subdued, reflective tone. "Counselor Crockett," he began slowly, "upon reviewing the newly presented audio evidence and the entirety of this case, I must acknowledge that the fine I imposed was premature and unjust. Your actions, though initially deemed disruptive, have in fact served to clarify the truth. I hereby rescind the fine imposed for contempt of court." His admission, sincere and measured, rippled through the room, eliciting murmurs of approval and relief from both the gallery and members of the press. For Thomas Harris, this turn of events ignited a spark of hope that had long been extinguished by despair. His eyes, once clouded with uncertainty, now shone with the promise of exoneration as the weight of the evidence began to lift the overwhelming presumption of guilt. Across the room, supporters and observers recognized that justice was finally catching up to truth. The judge's public acknowledgement of his mistake, coupled with the cancellation of the fine, not only vindicated Thomas but also served as a resounding endorsement of Jasmine's legal ingenuity. What began as an act of youthful defiance had blossomed into a masterful orchestration of the facts, one that exposed the fragile underpinnings of a case built on questionable evidence. The courtroom, once a battleground of conflicting narratives, now resonated with the simple yet profound truth that every measure taken in the pursuit of justice must be rooted in the unwavering commitment to clarity and fairness. As murmurs of admiration and relief filled the air, Jasmine stood silently for a moment, her posture reflecting both exhaustion and quiet triumph. In that charged silence, it was clear that her relentless dedication to uncovering the truth had not only saved an innocent life, but had also restored a measure of dignity to the judicial process itself. The resounding message was unmistakable. True justice is achieved not by blind adherence to initial appearances, but by the courage to question, investigate, and persist until the facts reveal themselves. A hushed silence fell over the courtroom as Judge Michael Jenkins prepared to deliver his final ruling. The tension that had permeated the trial for days now reached its climax. With evidence irrefutably demonstrating that Thomas Harris was not responsible for the bank robbery, the air trembled with anticipation of a long-awaited turning point. The judge cleared his throat, his steady gaze sweeping across the faces of those gathered: the defendant, his anxious family, the impassioned jury, and the watchful public. After thorough consideration of all evidence presented, including the expert testimony, new eyewitness accounts, and the crucial audio recording corroborating an undeniable alibi, this court finds that the prosecution has not met its burden of proof. Therefore, I declare Thomas Harris not guilty of the charges brought against him, Judge Jenkins pronounced, his voice resonating firmly throughout the chamber. In an instant, the courtroom erupted with a surge of emotion. Whispers of relief and joy swept through the crowd as Thomas Harris, whose expression had been a mixture of anxiety and resigned hope, broke into tearful smiles. His family rushed forward, embracing him with overwhelming gratitude, their relief palpable in every embrace and tearful glance. The media was quick to seize the moment. Flashbulbs captured every nuance of the scene. Headlines would later read, "Legal Miracle. Young attorney Jasmin Crockett shatters the presumption of guilt," and "Justice Triumphant. Thomas Harris exonerated in high-profile case." Reporters commended Jasmine for her brilliant, fearless advocacy. In the eyes of the public, she had evolved from a young, untested lawyer into a true legal genius, a beacon of hope and an emblem of relentless pursuit of truth. On the stand, Jasmine allowed herself a brief, satisfied smile as she exchanged a look with Thomas. The sacrifice of disputes, the passion of those whose voices had long been suppressed by blind assumptions, and her own perseverance had paved the way for this moment of vindication. Her earlier challenges, once seen as disruptions, had proven indispensable in unearthing the real story. The judge's decision was, in more than one sense, an acknowledgement of the inherent duty of the judicial system to question evidence and honor the right of every individual to be presumed innocent until proven otherwise. As the courtroom slowly cleared, the emotional aftermath lingered like a warm glow in the cool air. In a quiet corner, Thomas approached Jasmine. With genuine emotion, he expressed his deepest gratitude, saying, "I owe you everything. You didn't just defend me, you restored my hope in justice. Thank you for believing in the truth, even when no one else did." His words, sincere and tremulous, were a powerful reminder that the life of a single individual can illuminate the path to widespread reform. In that transformative moment, even Judge Jenkins seemed softened. His earlier stern demeanor had given way to reflective humility as he admitted, "I was perhaps too hasty in my judgments earlier. Today, justice has reminded us all that truth must always be pursued, even when it challenges our preconceptions." His words resonated deeply with everyone present, reinforcing the timeless principle that integrity, fairness, and the courage to question assumptions are the cornerstones of true justice. As the day drew to a close outside the courthouse, a palpable sense of renewal settled over the community. Jasmin Crockett's victory would not only become a celebrated case study in legal circles, but also a stirring call to action for society, inviting every individual to stand up for what is right, no matter the cost. The echoes of this trial were destined to inspire broader reforms and elevate conversations about the importance of meticulous legal scrutiny and equal access to justice. In the end, the triumph in the courtroom heralded a greater victory for all who believed that the truth could not be silenced. It was a day when the scales of justice finally balanced, affirming that each genuine act of courage can, indeed, change lives and reshape the very fabric of society. I hope you enjoyed this story. Leave a comment, sharing your thoughts about it. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new and equally exciting stories. See you in the next video.